Hi, good afternoon. This is Jody Patterson with Oasis Solutions. Thank you for joining us today for Take the Chaos Out of Fixed Assets Management. Again, my name is Jody Patterson. I'm the Client Team Manager for Oasis Solutions, and I will be hosting and facilitating our session today. However, Wayne Austin, Sales Engineer from Sage Software, is going to be doing the presentation and a small demonstration at the end. Advance slide, please. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. We do want you to ask questions, although your phones are going to be muted throughout the duration of the webinar today. So please enter any questions that you have in the chat window or the questions box. I prefer the questions box, and I will monitor those as we go throughout the webinar today. And we will have a session at the end for Q&A where Wayne will be able to answer those questions for you. If you have a question and we don't get it to it at the end of the webinar today, we can follow up with you separately. We are also recording the webinar and we'll be sending that out via email to everyone who registered or is attending today, and that should go out tomorrow. Okay, Wayne, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wayne Austin. I'm a sales engineer at Sage Software on the Fixed Asset Solution, and we appreciate you joining us with Oasis Solutions today to go over this webinar. So just a quick overview of what I will cover today. We're going to talk about why you need a fixed asset management solution. I'll cover areas such as data integrity, disaster recovery, things that can cost you that you may not be aware of, as well as talk about integration with Sage 100. At the end of the slide presentation, I will actually go into the solutions to give you a quick overview of all of the modules for the solution. So first, let's start off with talking about why you really need a fixed asset solution. Of course, some of you may be using some other software, or you may be doing this in an Excel spreadsheet, or it may be completely outsourced to a CPA firm, for example. But what we will cover, and I'm going to dive deeper into all of this, is really the benefits of using a solution like Sage Fixed Assets. We'll talk about data integrity, fraud prevention, audit preparation, ghost and zombie assets, and of course, business continuity / disaster recovery. So let's talk a little bit about data integrity. If, for example, you're using an Excel spreadsheet, there's going to be some challenges surrounding that. Data integrity is really referring to ensuring you have accurate data, a good audit trail of that data, and you have confidence in the critical aspects of that data. So if you look at some of the pitfalls, for example, of using an Excel spreadsheet versus using something like Sage Fixed Assets, you're going to be able to eliminate a lot of the confusion and chaos that would be tied to some of the weaknesses of using an Excel spreadsheet. So for example, data integrity is pretty limited in that scenario with Excel. You have no access control, you have little or no error detection, and you certainly hope whoever is doing the formulas to match whatever the current tax rules are is doing that correctly. I've certainly been in some scenarios where someone who has created the formulas is no longer with the organization, and of course that creates some serious challenges with whoever is left behind trying to reverse engineer what was actually done to ensure it matches correctly. Of course, the benefits of Sage Fixed Assets, which I'll be able to show you once I go into the solution. You have excellent data integrity, access controls. You can be pretty granular with that. You can create different profiles, limit who can do disposals, additions, transfers, and so on. And you certainly don't have those type of capabilities in an Excel spreadsheet. Built-in audit trails. There are Sarbanes-Oxley compliant audit reports, as well as the individual asset history tab to capture any changes you may do that may impact depreciation of an asset. Ease of handling tax. We actually update our tax rules annually. That typically comes out in January, but we certainly have the ability, if there are mid-course changes, for us to do something mid-year if there's an unplanned tax change that may come out. All of those tax rules are built in. There are thousands of calculations built in behind the scenes, so you can work with confidence knowing that your calculations are being done correctly. Let's talk a little bit about disaster recovery or business continuity. Now, As you've all seen in the last couple of years, the weather has been doing some certainly crazy things. Of course, if you're keeping your records in an Excel spreadsheet, you certainly are not going to have the same level of recovery as you would using a solution like Sage Fixed Assets. Having access to digital records, you can attach invoices, images of the assets, and so on. All of those are things that are going to make the process of providing information to your insurance provider of what you had at a particular location can certainly make a huge difference in that process. Now, let's talk about some of the things that can cost you, right? What are ghost or zombie assets? So ghost assets, let's start with that, which is the most common scenario, are going to be assets that are lost, stolen, or unusable, but you still have them on your registry. Zombie assets are simply the opposite, where these would be assets that someone may have purchased, did not inform the accounting department, you don't have them on the books, and therefore they're not represented in your registry. So let's look a little deeper at ghost assets and why they matter. Now, some of the things they can impact, of course, would be taxes or insurance expenses. You're paying for insurance, for example, or property taxes or federal taxes on assets that are no longer in service. You have no idea where they are. It's going to impact productivity from the standpoint of the time it's going to take to try and figure out where these things actually are. Or this equipment that should be in use, no one is able to actually use it. It's going to affect your budgets and many other critical business issues tied to the use of that asset. Zombie assets. Now, these are assets that someone may have purchased, have not placed it in service. Is it something that's required a license, or if there are support costs you're paying for or should be paying for, you don't have those covered because you have no record of that particular asset in your registry, and of course no insurance coverage as well. So you'll want to ensure that your records are accurate so that everything you do have in service is represented on the books, and of course the ones that are not are removed by doing a proper disposal of that asset so you can capture that gain-loss calculation. So let's look at the financial impact of ghost assets, for example, here. Now, this ROI calculator that's displayed on the right is readily available on the Sage Fixed Assets website. So if you want to be able to go in and put in your own numbers, you can certainly play around with it and run some different scenarios to see what your potential ROI could be. Now, you would simply go out to sagefixedassets.com and just click on the ROI calculator, and you can easily take a look at that. What's not factored in this calculations is the efficiency of your team, for example. Having a solution like this will certainly save you a tremendous amount of time, as well as the fact that if you have a scenario with ghost assets, for example, how much time is being spent trying to identify or find where those assets actually are. It's going to help you eliminate fraud, property tax overpayments, insurance premiums overpayments. So let's look at this particular scenario. If you look at the top right, the total cost of those fixed assets. And my sample data here, I'm simply just using $1 million. I'm sure most of you, your total value or cost of all of your fixed assets may significantly exceed that. But this is just a good starting point. Let's use a percentage of ghost assets of 15%, just an industry average, and a percent of the remaining value at 40%. That translates to a total cost of these ghost assets at $150,000 using this $1 million scenario, and a remaining value of those ghost assets at $60,000. Now, of course, the federal tax rate for businesses has been lowered to 21%, so that's what I'm using here in this scenario. So your potential overpayment based on that could be $12,600. For state, I'm using 6%. That could vary by your state, of course. And in that scenario, you're looking at $3,600 in potential overpayments for state tax. Property taxes, I'm using 3.4%. And that translates to $2,040. And for insurance premium, I'm using 0.01%, which translates to $1,500. So just using $1 million scenario for the total cost of your assets translates into a potential year savings of $19,740. So very impactful. Take some time, take a look at that ROI calculator, and you can walk through your particular scenario. Now, Sage 100 integration. Most of you are either using standard Sage 100 or 100 Cloud. This will integrate completely with both versions of that. And it'll actually give you the ability to integrate from the accounts payable or purchase order module, where you can create assets and the depreciation module to start depreciation, and with no further entries required. You can also pull the journal entry from the Sage Fixed Asset Depreciation module into Sage 100. So that's going to eliminate any type of duplicate entry in your scenario, and you'll actually be able to create from vouchers, receipt or invoice, or purchase order entry. Now, for the accounts payable module, it's a 1-to-1 ratio for assets being created from a single accounts payable transaction. On the purchase order side, it is a 1-to-many. So I could be working on a single purchase order entry and actually create 100 assets, 5 assets, whatever the case may be. So it gives you quite a bit of flexibility, and it's going to reduce redundant data entry. This is a sample visual workflow that you can set up inside of Sage 100. So by simply clicking on any of these, you can enter an AP invoice or a PO in either scenario, and be able to walk through the entire process of entering that accounts payable or purchase order, and actually tell it to create those assets while you're doing that. So no need to leave Sage 100, go into the fixed asset depreciation module and recreate those assets. You can send them straight over. You can even actually launch the fixed asset solution from in Sage 100 once that's configured. And I'm certain Jody's team would be happy to help with configuring that integration for you. So let's talk about the Sage Fixed Asset solution overall. It's really broken down into 4 pieces. Because it does give you the ability to manage assets through their full life cycle, you have a module that will handle from CIP, that would be the planning module. So if you've got recurring projects and you want to be able to manage those projects and the budget for those projects, you would be able to do that. The depreciation module, of course, will handle all of your depreciation calculations for tax and GAAP. The tracking module is for doing physical inventories, and I'll actually go deeper into each of these so you can get a better understanding of that, as well as show you in the demonstration at the end. They do have, all modules do have pretty robust reporting built in. Now, why do I have this additional reporting listed here? Because you also have the ability to get additional custom reporting. What that's going to do is give you some additional capability beyond the standard reports, which I'll go into deeper shortly. So let's start with looking at the planning modules. For those of you that have any type of recurring projects, be it a remodel or software development, or you're manufacturing something and you want to be able to manage the budgets for that throughout their that complete cycle, and then be able to place that asset in service, that's where the planning module comes in. It does give you a quick snapshot of what's going on within each project. So for example, in this scenario on the right, I can see what's spent or unspent of my budget. I can quickly see what's capitalized, what's expensed. So you can have both capitalized and expensed assets being created from the planning module. It'll show you your total transactions count. And if you look at the lower right, below project statistics, you'll see there it's showing an actual spend that's being compared against an original as well as a revised budget. So if things change as you're rolling through this project, you can certainly come in and create a revised budget and let that be your moving target as your estimates change throughout that project lifespan, and you can actually do great reporting against both sets of numbers. Now let's talk a bit about the depreciation module, which is the heart of the system. We have currently actually 52 depreciation methods built in. So, and those are available throughout all of the books. You can also create custom depreciation methods as well. If you look at the snapshot on the right, just like in the planning module, you can get a quick overview of what's going on with all of the assets in your company. So the graphic in the middle of that, on the left side of that graphic, you'll see it actually highlighted what's placed in service by quarter. You can also look at depreciation comparison, your 5-year spend on the acquisition comparison tab, and even a breakdown of the remaining life. And it even breaks it down on the far right below the asset listing, where you can see the total net value of all of the assets in the company, as well as it broken down by what's active, disposed, inactive, and so on. Built in to help you. Of course, year-end can be chaos for most people, and this tool is really designed to help minimize that. So this audit advisor that's actually built into the solution, you can run at various points throughout the year, so you do not have to wait until year-end if there is an issue to discover it, and of course now, be in a chaotic state trying to solve whatever you've been doing wrong throughout the year. What the audit advisor will do, you can run this either for GAAP or for tax. Look at what you've been doing so far. If you're doing anything that's a potential red flag for an audit, it's going to identify that. So in this particular audit report, you'll see that red X for an exception that's found. And in this particular scenario, I have an asset that has less than 100% business use, but I'm trying to do a full year of depreciation. So it will actually highlight the issue, shows you what it sees wrong, and it's going to recommend a resolution. And it will actually create a group where any asset that's triggering that condition will show up in that group. So it's a really excellent tool to help keep you out of audit harm's way throughout the year. And of course, you can run that as part of your year-end processes as well. There are many standard reports built into the solution. As I mentioned, you can also set different security levels. So if you want to be able to do things like limit who can do disposals, who can do transfers, who can merge companies, all of those are available. We do have a built-in 4562, so you can actually generate your own 4562 and the worksheet that goes along with that, and send that off to your external CPA firm, or if you're doing your taxes yourself, it'll certainly be handy for you as well. There's also built-in 4797 worksheet as well for your sale of property. So a lot of great standard reports for tax, as well as your standard things like your GL report, depreciation expense, and so on. Let's talk a bit about the tracking module. And this is an area that many people are not actually taking advantage of, but that is certainly becoming more driven lately, a lot more demand for this module, as people are being advised by their external auditors that, hey, you really need to start doing full physical inventories. Now, this is fully integrated with the depreciation module, actually uses the same database, but users using the tracking module will have no access to book fields, so they cannot do anything that's going to inadvertently affect depreciation of your assets in the depreciation modules. So this is actually what you would use for doing physical inventories of your fixed assets, where you can assign barcodes and asset ID numbers to your assets, and be able to use either a traditional scanner or an Android app to do those physical inventories. So you can actually send out multiple inventory lists to different devices and have different people going out doing physical inventories. The custom reporting. So as I stated, there's many standard reports built in, but if let's say you are in a scenario that you need to do something additional within the system, one of the capabilities this gives you is the ability to add or remove different columns of data to a standard report. But it's also going to give you a full-blown version of SAP Crystal Reports. Right now it's on version 2016, where you can build any type of ad hoc report from scratch for any type of data you want to be able to see. It actually works with all the modules. You can actually access any field in the database and literally create anything you choose. You can also export a standard report out to Crystal Reports and further customize it to look at more data than it is natively in the system. All of the reports, by the way, in the solutions are exportable to a variety of formats such as Excel, PDF, and out to Crystal. So now I'm going to take some time and go into the solution to give you a better look at what the solution looks like and ease of use, more importantly. So I'm going to actually start off in the depreciation module since this is really the heart of the system. And I'm going to start off by looking at that asset snapshot that I mentioned so you can see the data and how interactive it actually is. So looking at this particular view I'm looking at what's placed in service by quarter. So if you are doing the tax book, for example, and you can actually view this information by any of the books. But this is the first place you can see what's placed in service by quarter. And you actually do have an easy way if you are doing maker's depreciation for tax, and let's say you have exceeded 40% of those assets being placed in service in Q4, you can do a mid-quarter convention switch very easily in the system, which I'll show you in just a couple of moments. I can look at a quick depreciation comparison, looking at acquired value versus accumulated depreciation. I can look at my 5-year spend, and I can look at a breakdown of remaining life, which may help you with planning when to start replacing fully depreciated assets. Also shows my total net value and breaks it down by what's active, disposed, inactive, and so on. So just some great helpful information. Now, this is looking at the asset list view, and you can actually adjust your row as well as font size, make things a little easier to see. And before I actually go into the solution, I want to show you a couple of resources built in, and especially if you are handling the tax book. If you go to Help, What's New, and click on Learn More, it'll actually show you what are the tax rule changes included in this particular release. In my case, the release that came out in January. All of the changes from the Bipartisan Budget Act of last year are included in this release. We've also added 2 new depreciation methods, remaining value mid-month and remaining value half-year, for those that may need to take advantage of these tax extenders. I can look back to a previous year, so looking back at the TCJA changes for last year, let's say if I have some doubt or questions about what should I be doing for bonus depreciation, I can simply click on that. It's going to show you the old law info and the new law info all represented here. So you have a quick reference, a breakdown of the tables, what the rules are surrounding bonus. So it's just a really great a quick reference so you don't have to go hunting through the IRS website looking for information about things that may have changed in that particular tax rule. All of those rules, of course, are built in. We've also added, in an interim update that was done recently, Section 199A reports. So for those of you that really need this, this is an important addition for you as well. Now, let's take a look at some of the things I talked about as far as being able to make changes. If I go into an asset detail here, okay, and let's say you are currently doing, in my case, I'm using Maker's 200 accelerated depreciation. I'm doing 100% bonus. But let's say you have some assets that were sitting at 50% 160 allowance. You want to be able to change that en masse. You can actually do that very easily in the system. I can simply go up here and go to the 160 allowance switch, and I can change from 50% to 100 or vice versa. I can even turn depreciation off or on for any group of assets or all the assets, simply entering my fiscal year end, which book I want to make the change for. Now, it does really give you this ability and a lot of flexibility to be able to do that, because it really gives you the ability to look back retroactively. Let's say you were not doing this so far this fiscal, and you want to go back to the beginning of the year and make that change. Very, very easy place to actually do that. I mentioned the mid-quarter convention switch. I can easily do that as well. So if I run the mid-quarter applicability report at year end, and I see that I've exceeded 40% placed in service, I can easily switch from a half-year convention to a mid-quarter convention, applicable fiscal year again, and which book do I want to apply that to. So it gives you some great capabilities there as well. Now, let's say I want to actually go beyond changing my bonus percentage, for example. I want to actually take advantage of some tax law changes, current or future, and that may require me to change my depreciation methods from any of the books from whatever it currently is to something else, especially with real property, for example. If you want to take advantage of those two new tax rules methods, your remaining value mid-month and remaining value half-year are probably the bigger ones that you will do this. I can change depreciation method or estimated life for any books or for all the books, for any group of assets or all the assets very easily. There's actually a bulk edit feature, and that was newly added this year and partly driven by customer request. So we do listen to our customers. So if any of you are currently using Sage City, for example, the collaborative environment where you can put in requests for things, feature changes you want to see in any of our products, that's where you can go out and vote on it. And this was actually one of the big ones that people wanted to see changed, the ability to make mass changes to depreciation method and estimated life. So I can now choose which books I want to make changes to. I can choose any subset, any groups I created, or all the assets. And I can either change depreciation method from anything to something else, or I can change estimated life, or both. So let me use estimated life as a scenario here because I want to generate an issue. So I'm going to actually, let's say I want to change all of my 5-year assets, and it will look for years and months, and I want to change it to 21 years, something that I know that would be invalid for assets using Makers 200, for example. And that would be for the tax book. I can actually make this effective for my current depreciation through date, or I can go back to place and service date. And if I've done a prior adjustment to that asset where I have a beginning date, a beginning year to date, and beginning accumulated depreciation, I can say, hey, I want to go back to the place and service date and recalculate, but I do still want to retain that beginning accumulated depreciation info. And I can go to the next screen where it's going to actually validate this. This is where it's going to check that all of the assets that will be touched by this change, is it breaking any of the rules for tax or for GAAP? And it will actually show you in this report what it sees wrong. So let me actually make this bigger. And in this particular scenario, you'll see here I'm going back to place and service date. Some of those assets are fully depreciated, so it's giving me a warning here. But more importantly, it's giving me a hard error here where I'm trying to use an invalid estimated life of 21 years for assets that are using Makers Formula 200. So it does a validation check before making mass changes like that and keeps you out of trouble. So it really works out very well. Now, the audit advisor that I mentioned earlier and showed you a screenshot is actually great. So let me actually show you how that works live. I'm going to run this for the tax book. I'm actually going to run this for last year. And I want to show you how it actually creates a group and associates any assets with that group that may be creating an issue. So in this particular scenario, it's identified an issue. Okay. And it's actually created a group. Now, any assets that's triggering that will actually show up in that group. So I can simply go back to my asset list view and go to that group that is created. And these are all of the assets that are actually generating that issue. So here's what I'm taking. I'm putting it in as an expensed item, which is really not valid for an automobile. And this is another one here, same scenario. So by looking at that, I can now go in and say, hey, here's what it's telling me is wrong. Here's the recommended change. And I can go ahead and make those corrections to the assets impacted there. So it works out very well. All right. Now, for getting your assets in the system, of course, you may choose to do this yourself. You can certainly import from an Excel spreadsheet. or you can easily add assets manually in the system here. But in your scenario, if you're using Sage 100 or Sage 100 Cloud, you're more than likely going to be doing your asset additions from the accounts payable or purchase order module, and no need to add them manually. Now, if you look at these general information fields, these are all customizable, and really that gives you a lot of flexibility that's going to impact you in a couple of different ways. If you have multiple locations, for example, you may want to use a field for showing your locations, certainly things like a description, GL account info, asset classes. And when you're doing your reports, so for example, if you want to run something like your depreciation expense report, if I run it as is here, it's simply going to give it to me system number 1 to the N. But I can actually come here and tell it, you know what, I want to sort and subtotal this by asset class or by location up to 3 layers deep, and now give a breakdown in any subcategory that I choose. As long as I have that information defined in one of these fields, I can actually do that. If you want to create things like smart lists with all of your GL account info, very easy to do. And this is one of the things that will actually eliminate data entry errors. You can actually restrict entry, populate your account list, and now you don't have to worry about someone incorrectly typing in an account number, because it will only accept a valid account number that's in my list. So those are things you can do to actually protect yourself there. A couple of other features that I mentioned, being able to attach images, for example. I can attach invoices. I can attach an image of the asset, and it will take a pretty good variety of file types. And this will definitely be help with business continuity. If you have all of this data here, one of your sites is damaged, you can do a quick search for all the assets at that location, and you can provide the proof to your insurance company, especially if you've done some addition, updates, or whatever it may be to that asset. You have all the documentation here in one place. So it works out very well. Things like disposals, transfers, partial disposals, partial transfers are all accomplished pretty easily in the system, and you can actually even reverse those transactions very easily. So let's say I'm going to go in and do a full disposal of this asset. I can certainly go in, choose a disposal date, does not have to be current date. I can do sale or abandonment, whatever the case may be. In this case, since this asset is fully depreciated, I'm going to do an abandonment. No cash proceeds. Let's say I did have some expense to have it carted off. I can throw something in. It's actually going to calculate the gain loss across all the books. I can actually choose to defer recognizing this or not recognize it at all. And if it's something that I've done, taken an investment credit, tax credit for, I can actually see the recapture calculated here. If it is an asset that you're actually taking Section 179 or 168 allowance on, that will get factored in your disposal as well. I can go ahead and do my disposal. It's going to take me to the Transactions tab, which is going to capture full or partial disposals or transfers. And as you can see, this asset's fully disposed. That information will also be captured here on the History tab. You can see date done in the system will actually be shown separate from your disposal date. It's also going to capture who did it. Okay. Now, of course, let's say someone gives you the incorrect asset information, you've done a disposal, you need to be able to reverse this. Very easy to do. You can simply go to the Transactions, delete last transaction, like it never happened. Everything goes back to the way it was, but the History tab still has that information that it had been disposed. It simply adds a new entry that the last transaction was reversed and when it was done and who did it. And you can limit who can do things like that here and actually the system administration section, where you can create a more restrictive profile, for example, and limit what activities any user you assign to that profile can do, such as setting or clearing period closes, reversing transactions, doing disposals, transfers, and so on. So you have a tremendous amount of control of who can do what. Let me jump into some of those reports that I mentioned earlier so we can see what those look like live. the 4562, of course. Oops. I'm going to run this for last fiscal. And if I was sitting on my year end, this will actually generate the worksheet as well as the actual form. So it's an actual fileable form. You can simply export it, and everything you need is there. The worksheet, of course, which goes along with that. And as I stated, all of the reports are exportable to Crystal reports, PDF, CSV files, Excel, standard, Excel data only, so you have lots of options for exports. It also includes the tax expense report, which would be needed for actually reconciling that 4562. And for those of you who are responsible for property taxes, this is where actually using those general information fields will come in important, because instead of running this, for example, on all my assets, I can identify assets that are in a particular location tied to a particular jurisdiction. So I'm just running it on that subset of assets. Let's say my site one here, for example. If I'm using a field to identify property tax category, I can certainly identify it here. And now I have my property tax report for the correct subset of assets for that jurisdiction that I can easily generate. It will break it down by categories, since I am using a field for that, and year. And now you have a complete property tax detail report, easy to export. Of course, we include things such as your disposal reports or general ledger reports. In your scenario using Sage 100, you will not have to run this manually. If I actually go to the links and go to the Sage 100 hosting link, it's going to tell me that this information is already available to Sage 100. Because as soon as I run depreciation for whatever period I choose, so I'll go ahead and actually run this for all my books, and I'm going to run this for June, that information is now available to Sage 100. And I'm going to actually run the general ledger posting report manually so you can see what that report looks like, because this is all of the information that is now being pulled by Sage 100, your standard GL report. And if you do want to run this manually, you can actually do that, and you can even drill down and look at individual details below each account if you want to see what's generating a particular number. Disposal report, of course, because you'll need to capture things like realized gain loss info, total net proceeds for any period. This is not depreciation dependent, so you can actually run this for a month, for a year, for several years like I'm doing here, for whatever time period you want. But this is where you can actually capture all of this information, your net proceeds, realized gain loss info, anything you deferred, and so on. And as I mentioned, you have the ability to do full or partial disposals in the system. So I'm actually going to jump into the other modules so we can get a quick look at those. But before I do that, I actually want to show you how things come from the planning module if you do have CIP. When you send anything from the planning module, it's going to create an entry here, creates a group. So if I send 20 items over, it all show up here. And I can easily go in and see the details of this particular asset. And as you can see, it came with all the information needed, including any field I mapped from the planning module, but all of the information such as property type, depreciation method, estimated life, value, place and service date, and so on, ready to start depreciation. And for those of you wanting to reconcile things you may have sent over from Sage 100, you can actually run the annual activity report and just look at all your additions in general. I'm going to have it summarize the ones with no activity here. And this is going to be a rolling total as you run depreciation throughout the year. Anything that was added since the last time you ran depreciation will also get picked up here. So this would include anything you send over from Sage 100. So you have a quick way of seeing what was added current year, beginning cost info, any transfers in or out, current year dispositions, ending cost info, and of course your totals for all of that. So a quick way of reconciling that information. So I'm going to actually jump into the planning module and do a quick walkthrough of that just to give you a quick idea of what that looks like. The planning module can be used for handling any type of projects you have going, from you're building something, a renovation, software development, whatever the case may be. And there's that asset snapshot that's giving you an idea of what's going on overall in this project, what's spent or unspent of the budget, what's capitalized, what's expensed, and it's being measured against both an original and a revised budget. So when you actually set up your project, you can specify an approved amount or your original budget, and this can be your moving target if things change and you do want to track the spend against a revised budget. All of these line items you're looking at here are what's going to become a fixed asset, but of course below this you'll have invoices, POs, things like that that may come in. All of these fields are customizable here, and you can actually map these fields to fields in the depreciation side. So when this is sent over to start depreciation, you can actually capture any of this field data. Of course, at this level as well, you can have an original as well as a revised budget. And of course, below this is where you're going to have these POs from be it materials, labor, permits, whatever the case may be, and your rolling total of this is what's going to be your total spend for this asset. Now, let me go to one that's not been sent over. Once this asset's ready to be placed in service, this is where I tell it, yes, I'm ready for it to be placed in service. I can assign a template. I can even split this into multiple assets of different or equal values. And I can easily send any of these items over even before my entire project is complete, just by flagging it as spending complete. I can go to line items, create assets, and I can simply choose which of these I want to go to which companies. So if you have multiple companies in depreciation, you will be able to see them all here, and I can selectively send a few items over to a company, the rest to some other company, or I can select all and hit create, and it's going to create all of those assets. Now, as I stated, some great reporting here as well. I can look at a quick consolidated report looking at all of my projects, for example, or I can simply choose to look at just a few projects, and I can, at a quick glance, see where my spend is against budget for all of these. And I can actually drill down and look at the individual detail, looking at what's over budget within that project and my total for that project. I also have the ability here of running custom reports. For those of you familiar with Crystal reports, I can literally build any type of report I choose from scratch, or I can even export an existing report to Crystal and further modify it, because you have access to every field in the database, and you can literally look at any type of reports you want. Now, for the tracking module, I won't go as deep in that. You will actually be able to use an Android app or a traditional scanner. So here's just a screenshot of what the Android app looks like, where you can push an inventory list out to multiple devices, scan the barcode, update anything that's changed, and send this data back to the tracking module, where you can actually complete a physical inventory, accept any changes that may have occurred throughout that inventory process. And I'm just going in here briefly just to show you that in the tracking module, you can't accidentally get in trouble with anything that's going to impact depreciation. So let me actually go ahead and open the same company I was in. You will be able to see any of the companies you have in the depreciation module. And I'm actually going to go into, let's say, one of these computers here, where you will have all of the same general information fields, but if you notice, no book fields. But in addition to the same 28 fields you have in depreciation, it gets an additional 12. And this is where I can define an inventory list, push that list out to multiple devices, and be able to reconcile that data and end up with a report that's going to show me during that inventory. And I'm just going to run this for the last inventory I did here. and it's going to show me what items were not found, anything I made changes to. So these were the status of any items that were not found. These would be your ghost assets that are going to be very important to you, and these are what's costing you money, overpayment of tax, insurance premiums, and of course you don't have the use of it. Status of O means no changes, anything I made a change to. Status of C. But this is important to identify because this is how you eliminate ghost assets. And those pieces all work seamlessly together. Now, this is just a high-level walkthrough because I want to give you a complete understanding of how the total solutions work. Of course, in your scenario, you may need different portions of the solution or the complete solutions, but I do want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to pause at this point and switch back to the main screen so that we can actually see if there are some questions. Jody, do we have any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Wayne. Really appreciate that overview of Stage 6 assets, the different modules that are available. We do have a couple of questions coming in. Let's start first with, here's somebody who's going to want it. They're asking already, how do I get my fixed assets data into Sage Fixed Assets? Their CPA is currently maintaining fixed assets depreciation for them.
Okay. So you can actually import from an Excel spreadsheet. So if you can get an export of your data out to an Excel spreadsheet, and you can bring in your data for financial book, for GAAP, and of course for tax, state, whatever they're doing for you, all of that can be imported from an Excel spreadsheet. And if you're not confident doing that yourself, I'm quite sure that Jody's teams are experts of doing that. They can actually help you and make this turnkey for you. Now, if you are a CPA firm yourself, a lot of CPA firms actually use the solution for managing other customers' fixed asset depreciation. So you can absolutely do that as well. Works in both scenarios. Next question.
Next question. How are the modules bundled?
Oh, okay. So you can actually get an individual module. If you're interested in depreciation only, let's say, and maybe it's on your radar for later on, for adding the tracking or planning module for CIP, you can add those later. Most people that are going with a single module are usually starting with depreciation, but you certainly can go with the tracking module. Let's say you're interested in doing physical inventories, and at a later date you want to add some other module. You can actually do that as well.
Great, thank you. How do I get more information? Stage Fixed Assets.
Sorry, Jody. Before I go past this point, I would be remiss if I didn't mention there are cost savings with bundling. So if, let's say, you want to start with depreciation, but you know your auditor is saying, hey, I've got to do physical inventories, and you say, oh, I'm going to wait a few months and then add it, there's actually cost savings by bundle them together. So if you do what we call a track pack, where you're getting depreciation and tracking, or a project pack where you're doing depreciation and planning, there are cost savings involved in bundling them together over doing individual modules at a time. So definitely have some conversations with Jody, and she can advise you based on your timeline as to what's going to be the best path for you. Okay, next question.
So Wayne essentially answered that next question, which was, how do I get pricing? You simply call me. This is Jody Patterson with Oasis Solutions. My email address is jody@oasisky.com. My phone number's not up there, but if you know our phone number, I'm at extension 225. When you want to learn more about fixed assets and how it can fit into your organization, we simply have a conversation. I learn more about what you're currently doing today and what your needs are, and then we help put together the pricing packages, the bundles, or the sets of user counts, and decide which one of those is going to work best for your company, and then I can provide you the pricing as well as the services for the implementation of Sage Fixed Assets for your company. Seeing if we have any other questions. Several of the same one. Okay, if anybody has any other questions, please go ahead and send those through to the question window right now. because I'm not seeing any others at the moment, but we have a few more minutes. Okay, also related to how to get the data into Sage Fixed Assets. If they're keeping their depreciation in a subledger in Excel today, can they utilize that for import into fixed assets?
Sure. And actually, once they've had some conversations with your team, Jody, they can easily learn, what information they used to have, because there are some critical depreciation fields that are must-have. So, for example, anything you're adding, being an import or manually in the system, you've got to identify, property type, place and service date, depreciation method, estimated life, and of course the value. So as long as they can get all of those required data into an Excel export, you can actually import from a standard Excel or CSV file, no problem, into the solution. And I'm sure the Oasis Solutions team will help you with getting everything together you would need.
Okay, and another question came in. You mentioned it during the webinar, but how many books can you keep in Sage Fixed Assets depreciation, and which ones are standard?
Oh, okay. So currently, I'm going to just jump back here so I can show you that.
I don't see any other questions at this time, so we're going to wrap up 4 minutes early, give you back a little bit of time in your day. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Wayne, for the demonstration and talking to us about the importance of fixed assets in the life of a company. For more information, please feel free to reach out to me directly, jody@oasisky.com, or call our office. I'm at extension 225. We can set up a call, learn more about your specific needs, and then we can also have Wayne do a personalized demonstration for your company should you wish to explore that further. So thanks again, Wayne, for joining us, and thanks everyone for being on the webinar today.